fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
The constitutional point of view was critical for Jefferson's support of the Bill of Rights.
As we mourn the loss of thousands of our citizens, I can hear you!
Is time running out? It's Saturday, and pollen is in the air. You can probably hear it in my voice. It's a Hayden Collins radio program. The Intelligence Syndicate, hardly working, or working very hard. Difficult to tell sometimes. But it is spring, leaves, pollen. Today, what I wanted to talk to everyone about was trends. We're going to be talking about trends. So noticeable trends that have taken place. And I do mean noticeable trends. We have economic trends that are going on right now, and some other things that are trending around the world that are a little hairy and crazy and scary. I covered it a couple of weeks ago, even before the mainstream media got a hold of it. Finland collapsed. Socialists are being real quiet about that one. But Finland collapsed under the cost of their own medical programs and their own medical industry. And we're looking at somebody else in Europe that we're being really quiet about right now, who's teetering on the edge. They're even looking for a bailout. And they look like they're going to collapse real soon. So we might have number 2 going down, another socialist nation crashing under the weight of their own promises. And we talked last week about how the capitalist program inside the United States that was feeding all these socialist programs are no longer doing that because the rules changed inside the United States, so we don't have to feed other socialist programs around the world. So here's some trends. For those of you that follow social media, you've noticed some serious trends in ratings. After this call it whatever you want, 2-year chase of Donald Trump. Do you guys really, I researched this and had a lot of fun with it. Ever since Dwight D. Eisenhower, every Republican to take office is immediately tried to get impeached, or the Democrats immediately try to impeach him. Every one. If you're a Republican going to office and you get the president, you know that the Democrats are going to try to impeach you. Doesn't matter. They just try to do it. That's what they do. That's their plan. We'll impeach them. Didn't work out too well for you. So call it Russia, call it whatever you want. And for the longest time, even at the beginning of this, I told everyone, I said, I've been there. They're not this organized. They're not, it ain't happening. So lo and behold, it didn't happen. So the trend now is, there's a lot of people throwing mud at the press for not doing their job. They reported on things that they didn't investigate on, and they're not smart enough to see, and that's the sad thing, they're not smart enough to see their own failures. That is a cancer. Our press has cancer. They're not smart enough to see their failures in investigation. They're not smart enough to see their failures. They were fed information. They were continually fed information that nobody researched. And lo and behold, guess what? When they're completely done with the investigation, even after people came out and said, yeah, this is it, this is it, this is it, and then gloom and doom, bombshell, just go listen to any of the things on Facebook or any of the social media trends, and you'll see that they predicted the end of the world as we know it, yada, 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 blah, 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 and it didn't happen. So the trend now is away from the press. So anything that has been degraded to the press, like, oh, the press is the enemy of the American people because they're not doing their job, all of a sudden they're having to defend that. They're having to defend that statement because it's been proven to the American people they didn't do their job. That, to me, is scarier than anything. Because they took exactly what they were fed. They didn't research anything, and this is what we got for 2 years. Imagine if we had an investigation group, in the press that actually did some investigation, some reporting, maybe this could have been knocked out within, a couple of weeks, and then moved on to other issues. We may even have more important issues to look at. You know, we could be advanced. We could be really moving forward, but that's not going to happen. So here's another trend. During the Obama administration, we looked at all kinds of things that we said, hey, that's corrupt, that's corrupt, that's corrupt, and you can't be doing this and you can't be doing that. Well, that's kind of turning around. But the Obama era practices are still practiced in Chicago. And I'm talking about Jussie Smollett. So now in Chicago, if you know the Obamas, he's still issuing pardons. So he was going to issue a pardon to Jussie Smollett. You know, here you go, through the state of Illinois, and yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. But apparently, he doesn't have that power. So what is happening now, the latest and greatest, is they can't do that. The federal government says, look, it's mail fraud. The state can't dismiss that. Sorry, state. You wish you could dismiss mail fraud. So there's a few other things going on. I don't think he's going to walk away from this unscathed. I don't think everybody involved in this whitewashing is going to walk away from this unscathed. The trend is not to let that kind of corruption happen anymore. Again, we're talking about trends. And you can't see this unless you're politically involved. Okay? Even on the Republican side. Those guys are so tight now they squeak when they walk. They're trying not to create a trend or a moment or anything. The Democrats haven't learned that lesson yet. You know, the Chicago is a perfect example. Now imagine what happens during this trending to where everybody who is moving into a position of power has to move over a little bit because of all these new people making money and this new economy. So there's fresh blood in places. There are fresh blood in places where people don't like tolerating that type of corruption. The economy has provided for the opportunity for these individuals to move up. Not like a socialist government where you're limited to your level of socialism. The government limits your success. The government limits what you can do in a socialist government. In a capitalist government inside the United States, or I say capitalist government, a capitalist environment, you're not limited by the government. You can excel as far as you want to excel. So all of these trends that we're looking at, these political trends of, hey, I know you, you're my buddy. You know what's killing these political trends? Do you know what's killing the good old boy network? The internet. This whole thing with Jussie Smollett could have been an individual thing taking place between aldermen in the city of Chicago and never would have gone anywhere. Okay? Never would have gone anywhere. If the Obamas hadn't been involved, if the internet hadn't been involved, and there was such an outrage of this corruption nationwide. So now they have to answer for it because it's whitewashed. They see it as corruption. Okay? So they have to answer for it. They can't let it go. Because if they let it go, no one has a ground to stand on. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story. I've told this story before, but I got to tell it again just because of this. Way back in the day, during the British colony days, there was an incident called the Boston Massacre. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of the Boston Massacre. I went over there, I took the tour, I talked to locals, I told you guys the story, on the show before, okay? And it's a really neat story, so if you want to go back to that radio show, it's easy to find. I think I put down the title of that one is Boston Massacre and More. But let's get to the gist of this. When it came court time, when it came time for that British officer and those men to face the court, one of the Adams brothers defended them. Think about this. A revolutionary defended the British soldiers and the British officer that was involved in the Boston Massacre. Now, you have to put yourself in a position of a moral state. And in that moral state, and I say moral state, that's probably the wrong word, but let's use that word for right now. In that position of a moral state, the individuals that are actually defending the British, that are actually putting things together of this Boston Massacre, are defending them on behalf of the laws of the land. Okay? Without the laws of the land, if they are not upheld, we don't have anything. You have elitists that will rule, and everybody else suffers. And remember, we're talking about trends. We're starting to see the trend where some of the elitists in the United States don't have the power to rule anymore, because there's new people with money moving into places where they were, and they don't tolerate that. This economy growth is good. It's actually good for the nation, and I think it's good for the laws of the land. These outcries of whitewashing and cover-ups, they're not being silenced. And they're not being silenced because it's not the media that's getting behind it in silence, and it's not government officials who are trying to. The internet is shutting them down. So, you're looking at transparency. The internet is providing more transparency in the government than the press ever will. Now, understand that statement. The internet and social media is providing more transparency into government than the press ever will, because the press only puts out what they're given. I know that's an evil thought, but that's a cancer. That's where they failed. By the way, John Adams won that case. He proved that the British did everything they were supposed to do to protect the subjects there. And when things got out of hand, nobody knew what happened or whose fault it was, but they defended the British soldiers and he followed his orders. Not that it made it right, not that it made it wrong. But as you go back to the old saying, 2 wrongs don't make a right. But the most important thing to draw from that little synopsis is the fact that John Adams believes in the law of the land. And the law of the land was upheld. Okay? All right, so I got to talk about something else here. We got into a deep conversation about all of the amendments. First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, yada, yada, yada. So some important things have happened in the past couple of weeks. The decision by the Supreme Court on the Fourth Amendment, where they talked about seizures. And I don't mean health seizures. I mean search and seizure. For the longest time, we've had, how do I describe this? If a drug dealer got pulled over on I-75 going north in a brand new Pontiac Firebird, whatever it is, that's my favorite car, but brand new Pontiac Firebird, and they busted him with drugs, the sheriff's department would get the car, because the car was being used in drugs and so on and so forth and blah, 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 blah. Well, for the longest time, a lot of people are going, well, wait a second, you can't do that. We as citizens of the United States are protected from seizure of property. Even though we commit a crime, we're protected from seizure of property. Well, eventually it got to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court agreed with the Constitution. You can't do that. So a lot of these places are not going to be able to seize property anymore. Duh. I wonder if they're going to have to pay back the people they did seize property from. Houses, cars, all kinds of stuff. Okay? So we got into this discussion. Now here's where this discussion is going to go. Trends. You see a lot of trends about people doing the abortion laws. You see a lot of trends. The Democrats' answer to the abortion laws is they're going to pass gun laws. And it occurred to me that the only amendment in our Constitution that has any laws that are tried to write against it, limiting it, or anything else is the Second Amendment. No other amendment has laws written against it. Okay? Now, you can debate me on the search and seizure thing. That one I would have agreed with. I would have said, okay, you know what? Yeah. But now that it's been taken to the Supreme Court, guess what? That's done too. The precedent is set. So everybody that has that, all they got to do is sue, and the county loses, or the sheriff department loses, or whatever, because Fourth Amendment rules. Here's the other goofy thing. No state, the federal government consumes powers at the default of the state. And what that means is if the state doesn't make a decision on something, the federal government decision is the rule. That's why you have some states that are legal marijuana and some states that aren't. Because if the default to the federal government is, well, marijuana is not legal, then anytime there's a federal government involved, well, guess what? There you are. You got problems. But if it's your local state government and they pass a law, well, then you don't have problems. That's kind of where this is going. So the discussion we had about this whole thing is how many states have passed Second Amendment laws or gun seizure laws or red flag laws or whatever they may be that eventually got challenged in the Supreme Court, and guess what happened? They lost. So we started researching this, something that the press doesn't do. And it was hard to research because you have to look up by lawsuit, you have to look up by, was it a gun-related issue? So it was very difficult to find. But everything we found conclusive answers to it. And it wasn't very surprising. Every gun law that has gone to the Supreme Court and been challenged has sided upon the Constitution. And each time, for example, the state of Illinois and their law about guns, they lost. Maryland is certainly going to have that problem soon because they had a red flag law where they were coming to take guns from people that did nothing wrong. And people got killed over it. Cops got killed over it. Now it's going to court. It's going to go to the Supreme Court. And guess what's going to happen? If it stays on this trend, 100% of the time, the Supreme Court's going to agree with the Second Amendment, and the state of Maryland was wrong. You can't randomly go to a guy's house with no warrant, nothing else, and seize their guns just because you want to seize their guns. The reason the Second Amendment is there. Now take to the other side. You got these guys in the states going, hey, it's open carry. You don't have to have a license or anything. Second Amendment stands. The Second Amendment is the Second Amendment. You got several states doing that. And they're telling these other states, hey, you know what? Here's the rule. We're following the Second Amendment. And these other states are still trying to make laws against it. So what you as citizens got to think about is how many of your state legislatures are you paying to make special gun laws that you know are going to get rejected by the Supreme Court? Think about that. You have all this time in the legislature you're wasting, all the votes you're wasting, all the money that's being spent, okay, on a law that is not going to survive the Supreme Court. It's not going to survive the Constitution test. Okay? It doesn't provide anything. But they spend money on it. Some governor signs it. As soon as something goes wrong, it's challenged. It goes to the Supreme Court, and the state loses millions because they got to repay everybody. They got to give back all the guns. They got to give back all the property because they did not follow the amendments of the Constitution. They created their own ride. There's some trends there. Yeah, I know. I keep saying that. So let's take a little trip to California. Boy, I know, the left coast. Let's take a little trip to California. There's a trend in California. People are leaving. They're leaving the gun-free state of California. Well, I say that, and it's not, but the leftist state of California, and they're going to Texas in groves. And Texas is pretty much, well, I guess after this legislation, they're going to be an open carry state. So why do all these, people who are leaving California to go to Texas and leaving behind all of the safety of California that they had? And one of the conversations we had was, you could be broke in Texas or you could be broke in California. Which one would you rather be broke in? California is much nicer and it doesn't have a winter, down in the valleys or whatever. And so my end of the conversation is, yeah, there's plenty of people that made that decision. They live in San Francisco and they're peeing and pooping on the streets because they got no place else to be. They have no money. So do you really think their value in life and their quality of life is much better in that condition than in a condition where they can make money and move forward? Or they can establish themselves and move forward? But there's a trend there. Now you have one of the guys from San Francisco who's now the governor of California. They're getting to do a recall election out there. This guy has gone so far left that, they're missing Jerry Brown, and Jerry Brown was left. And they're getting ready to recall this guy. It's getting pretty scary every time they mess up like that. So this is what happens when you have San Francisco and Los Angeles selecting the mayor, and nobody else in the state having an opportunity because they're outvoted. Oh yeah, here's another thing. I got to have fun with this. Every time I feel sorry for the party opposite, let's say the party opposite, whatever the party opposite is, they have to come up with something to make their party relevant. So the Democrats right now can't gripe about the unemployment rate. They can't gripe about the economy. They can't gripe about the GDP. So they're going to, we got gun rights and we're going to raise taxes and we're going to do Obamacare and all this stuff America has rejected and pretty much thrown to the side. They also have to put themselves in a position of really weird stuff. For example, and I love this one, there's a bunch of Democrats out there that are pushing legislation to get rid of the Electoral College. And I went, what? So Texas, California, and New York would pick the presidents, and none of the other states would even have an option in it? We would not have an equal voice? I'm sure that that's really going to pass. But that's the kind of crazy stuff they throw out there, hoping that somebody's going to say, you know what, we need to side with those guys because a majority rules. We're a democracy. And that just sends chills up and down my spine because we're a republic. And they don't understand. So keep an eye on the trends. Just keep an eye on the trends because it's trending in a very positive manner right now. If we continue to expose corruption, if the internet is now acting as the press where the press has failed, and people are being held accountable and the good old boy network is being destroyed because of the internet, that's a good trend. That's a very good trend. If people are upwardly mobile and they're able to infiltrate areas they were not able to infiltrate before because they didn't have the money and now they do, and now they're making money and moving forward, making a better life for themselves, that's a good trend. That's a very good trend. You know, there's plenty of good trends out there. Let's hope they continue. Let's get rid of the bad ones. All right, come back from the break. We'll have Oops, I Arted again. The twins going at it and having some fun. And then this week's roundtable was done at university. It was live, so it will not be broadcast on the air. Doing a lot of that this year. In fact, for the next 18 months, going to be doing live roundtables. We might have a couple of taped ones we'll put on the air, but they're all live roundtables. All right, so that's what it's going to be like. A lot of work. Nonetheless, come back from the break. We'll continue on with the Hayden Collins radio program, Oops, I Arted. And you go out and have a good spring. Be about it.